So you have learned how to use the built-in exceptions in the standard library. Now we can also create our own custom exceptions that are more meaningful in our application domain. For example, think of the situation where someone's account is locked. We cannot represent this using invalid argument or out of range exception, right? This is where we can create a custom exception to represent this kind of error. So we add a new class called account locked. Now, while not compulsory, it's best to have this class inherit the exception class in the standard library, so we can catch exceptions of this type in a centralized exception handler in the main function. So first, we include the std except header file. This is where the exception class is declared. Then we add using namespace std. Now we have this class inherit the exception class. Now in this class, we can have any kind of attributes for storing information about this error. We don't really need it for now, so I just want to override the what method for returning an error message. So here in the public section, we override the what method. So this method returns a constant character pointer, which is a C-style string. We talked about them in the previous part of the course. So if you're not familiar with this concept, go back and watch the section about strings in part 2. Then we add the method name. This method is declared as constant. And here we add the override keyword. Now in this method, we return an error message like your account is locked, contact the admin. Okay. Now here we have a compilation error because in the exception class, this method is declared with the noExcept keyword. When we add this keyword to a function header, we are telling the compiler that this function doesn't throw an exception. And in this case, this makes perfect sense because we're going to call this method in a catch block. Earlier, I told you that in a catch block, we should not write code that would throw an exception. So by adding this keyword here, we're telling the compiler that this method is not supposed to throw an exception. So if we accidentally write code that would throw an exception, the compiler would give us a warning. Yes, the code will still compile, but we get a warning here, and we can also find that warning in the problems window. So now we have a warning saying what has a non-throwing exception specification, but can still throw. So this is how this method is declared in the base class, and we need to add the noExcept keyword when overriding it. Just remember that the noExcept keyword has to be between const and override. So we cannot add it after override or before const. Okay? So this is our what method. We're done with this exception. Now back to our main file. On the top, first we're going to include the account locked header file. Now over here, let's define a function called login. Now in a real application, here we need to pass a username and a password. Let's not worry about all those details. Instead, we just want to throw an account locked exception. Now, in the main function, we're going to call this function. Now, because the login function throws an exception, we need to catch it properly. So here we can catch an account locked exception, or we can use a more general form and catch any kind of exception. Now let's just print x.what. All right, now take a look. So we can use a custom exception just like a built-in exception in the standard library.